This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. Nick Kennedy is the creator of SIO2PC, the hardware and software combination that allowed Atari 8-bit computer users to use a PC as a peripheral. In 1989, this was unprecedented, a new way to connect the little Atari to the bigger world, to the relatively massive storage and speed of a computer running PC-DOS. For the first time, Ataris could use a PC as storage, RAM disk, and printer. Nick also created the ATR file format, which quickly became the standard for using virtual floppy disks on Atari emulators. Nick also created 1052PC, a cable that let you connect an Atari floppy drive directly to a PC, and AtariCOM, a less well-known utility that allowed two Atari computers to communicate with each other using the SIO and joystick ports. And he created Atari-based amateur radio tools, a terminal program for packet radio, and Morse code keyer software, which he and I talked about in detail in a previous interview. This interview took place on November 1st, 2024. Unbelievably, it's been almost 2 years since we last talked.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking it was one, but yeah, it had been a long time.
January 21st, 2023,
Okay,
according to my notes. Now we're heading into 2025.
that's right. Yeah.
So we dealt with the ham radio stuff pretty well last time, but there's all the other world of things you did. Let's backtrack a little bit. Can you tell me how and when you got your first Atari machine?
Yeah, I think it was around 1982 or 83. I was in Jefferson City, Missouri. And of course, well, I'd like to say I wanted to learn complicated language and do great things, but actually, the family and I would go to a pizza place and they had a arcade and it had Asteroids on it by Atari. And it was like amazing. And we played it. And of course, it had vector graphics. It's a little different, turns out, than the one on the 800. But anyway, uh, I start seeing the Ataris advertised. And of course, they had been Apple and others for a while. They're rather expensive, so it took a while to work my way up to doing it. But you tell all these big lies like, well, I'm going to balance my checkbook or something stupid like that. But you really just want a toy to play with. So I did buy that thing, and then the cassette drive and enough memory to fill it out to 48K. The whole mess must have come up to $1,200 or so. I don't know, but I bought, or else it came with a basic cartridge. And when I was playing with that, I thought this is so much better than Fortran was in college, because in Fortran you'd punch these cards, you put them on a table, you come back the next day, you get a printout and it says, you made an error, fix these cards. So you fix it and you come back again the next day. So I thought programming is not fun. But once I got into the interactive thing where I had a keyboard and video, um, you know, I started getting into that. And then you read about in the magazines about assembly language. And I don't know, I may be repeating myself from our earlier talk. I probably am. But it just seemed really exotic, like kind of a priesthood. If you could break into that, that would really be something above just programming and basic, which is fun too. But I did get an assembler cartridge. I think one of your programs or some other did an interview, I think, with the person who developed that cartridge. But anyway,
Yeah, Steve Lauro, you might be thinking of.
yeah, it was fascinating. But anyway, I did eventually get going on that, and then you mentioned, we talked about it last time, I did this huge keyer program for ham radio, and that really grounded me in 6502 programming and also in the Atari hardware. That's a learn by doing thing, and by the time I was done, I was pretty good at it. So that's a very long answer to a short question.
Great. So I don't know what order you created things. I have a list of things that you made. The AMAC assembler, SIO2PC, ATR file format, a couple other things. So do you remember what came first?
Okay. Now, just to clarify, the assembler, I was just promoting the AMAC assembler. It's an Atari product, and I used the assembler editor cartridge for a while, but it had some limitations despite being a really great device. So, and I'd read about you need a macro assembler if you want to be serious, So I bought this thing, and it had some serious shortcomings. It had some bugs in it. If you wrote a macro that was over, I never did really figure it out, but maybe 10 or 20 lines, the whole program would just blow up. And also, at about the same time, the Mac 65 cartridge came out, and the Atari community assembly language programmers just loved that. So I think Atari kind of abandoned the AMAC thing shortly after releasing it. It had other issues too. It had a copy protection scheme. It had an editor and an assembler. They were either separate programs or maybe even on separate disks. So you edit a while, then you put in another disk and load the AMAC assembler. But it had a really primitive type of copy protection with bad sectors. So it would have to retry 3 times. And then it would go ahead and load the thing after it realized, okay, the bad sector is here. Anyway, it made it unusable, and I managed to get rid of the copy protection. And then when I was able to get into using virtual disks and stuff, it sped everything up tremendously. And that's why I put on my webpage a little promotional, here's AMAC assembler. It's really not that bad. And here's some stuff about how to use it. So that kind of maybe clears up things on the...
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Excuse me for running away. I got a few props here, but there it is. You recognize the format of this book.
Sure. The Atari macro assembler.
Yeah. And nice. Then let's see, where did we go from there? I forgot you had maybe a multi-part question.
SIO2PC.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course, I'd done all this programming on the Atari, and the PC was really coming on strong, and people were adopting it. And especially because of the PC clones, because even back then, I think a PC might have cost you $4,000, but a clone could be had for maybe half that. And so, I'm looking it over, just like I had to get over that hurdle with the Atari. Like, can I spend this much money? Do you remember the DAC company, DAK?
Sure.
All kinds of weird junk, Drew Kaplan.
Uh-huh.
Well, I bought the DAC 8286 computer. It had the GEM operating system, which is a forerunner to Windows. And it had, I think, a 20 megabyte hard drive. So I thought, man, this is fabulous. I got all this. I got 640K of RAM. I got this huge hard drive. And I'd already gotten real interested in data transfers because I'd written, you mentioned earlier, a couple of things for Atari to Atari. Turns out that appeals to me. I'm not, with computers, and especially the Atari, there's a lot of visual stuff you can do, but I'm not very visually oriented. So I went into the data transfer thing, and I'd gotten interested in that. So I thought it'd be great if I could use this new PC, because I also want to learn assembly language on it. I've become a real assembly language fanatic. So I go, here's a whole new processor. I want to learn assembly language, and it's basically the same thing, whether it's 8086, 88, 286, 386, 486. As long as you're not getting into the protected mode and stuff, they're all compatible. But anyway, I wanted to learn that. So I had to look at, the technical feasibility, and the PC has a serial port, and the Atari has its SIO port. But once you look at it, you set it up basically the same way as a serial port on a PC. It has the same baud rates, and you can do the handshaking and all that stuff. So I could see that I could match that stuff up. And then you got to look at the connectors and the voltages. That was a little bit of a problem, and also a little bit of an advantage, because The PC uses the RS-232 standard. So you have a positive voltage for logic 0, which is kind of strange. It's upside down, and a negative voltage for logic 1, whereas the Atari uses what's called TTL voltage levels. So 0 volts is logic 0, plus 5 volts is logic 1, and there's no negative voltage. So I had to kind of accommodate that. The 0 to 5 volts wouldn't hurt the PC's port, but the plus up to 12 or 15 volts and minus 12 or 15 volts might hurt the Atari hardware. So I had to clamp down those voltage ranges. But it also kind of had to be inverted, because the more positive one is logic 0 on the PC, but it's logic 1 on the Atari. So I said, okay, I need an inverter chip and I need to limit the voltages. And the RS-232 is quite flexible. It'll usually, most of the time, work with 5 volts to 0 volts, even though it might not be optimum. So, I did that in an experiment and it worked. But then I found that there's this chip called the Max 232, which is designed specifically for that, converting TTL to RS-232 and back. It has 2 lines in each direction, so it was ideal for what I was doing. And it even, you power it with 5 volts, but it creates the plus and minus 10 volts. Then there was one more issue, and that's that the Atari serial bus that all the peripherals connect to, well, it's a common bus. And so any peripheral that's not active has got to stay off. It can't be low and it can't be high. It can't be driving that wire to any voltage. It's got to be disconnected. Well, it's a trademark of some company. There's a thing called tri-state. So a logic chip will usually have a high or low output. Well, these tri-state chips had a control line, and you can go high, low, or off, or if you want to call it disconnected or high impedance. I had to add that chip. It would have still worked, but you wouldn't have been able to daisy chain multiple devices, because it would be hogging the bus at all times. So that was my first hardware design, and I call it the 2-chip design, because later I realized, I'm learning this stuff as I go along. There's a logic called open collector logic, where you just connect a transistor to the line. The line itself is always maintained by the system at a positive voltage. I hope I'm not getting too esoteric here.
No, it's fine.
You turn on that transistor and it pulls it down the ground. It pulls it low. If you turn off that transistor, it's not doing anything. It won't source voltage. And so that's what I needed. So I actually kind of simulated that with a diode. But the bottom line is I cut back from a 2-chip version to a 1-chip version. It made the hardware simpler, and I also had to revise the software because there's a little bit of difference in the logic as far as which one you were using.
But that original 2-chip design, which allowed you to have a peripheral, I mean, basically you could have the PC connected to the Atari, but also a floppy disk, so that you could copy things from a Atari floppy disk to an ATR file or whatever.
Yeah. And since my device had only one connector, you could still have multiple disk drives, but my device had to be last because it didn't provide a jack for another one. But that's not generally a big issue. So, but then another thing that did, when I get into the, what I was thinking when I was doing this, I thought at first, well, if I can do this in software, it doesn't really have any possibility of making me any money. I wasn't trying to make money, but if I could, I would. And so I thought, can I make money off this deal? But then I thought, if it needs a hardware device, getting back to the original thing, I say, well, I could put it out as software and say, here it is for sale, or here it is, please send me some shareware money. And some people will and some won't. I understand that, not a problem. But I wasn't going to make any money on it. But if I required a hardware device, then unless they were pretty technically astute, they really kind of needed to get it from me. And so that's why I thought I would try that. But there's a lot of other issues come into play. I don't have an entrepreneur's personality. I'm not going to put up, say in those days, money, $1,000 at risk, maybe to have a manufactured circuit board made, so it'd be real easy to build. I build each one at a time using Radio Shack prototype boards, putting little jumpers on. And likewise, I wasn't going to spend money for advertising, so I would just kind of put out announcements in some of these magazines and whatever would say, "Oh, that's interesting. We'll put a notice," So I'm doing everything on the cheap because I didn't really have any faith in the idea I'd make any money, which is probably a good idea that I didn't. But that was kind of where that went. And eventually, I still had to charge for the device because I was putting in my time building them, but it was kind of freeware after that.
So how much did you charge for the device, and how many did you sell, and did you make any money?
I think I originally charged like $50, and then later I may have come down 40 or 35 or something like that. Uh, everything in computers started out high and was going down. I mean, you could buy a program that was basically a few hundred lines of BASIC and pay $50 or $75 for it just because the field was brand new. But anyway, I think over a few years, I probably sold a couple hundred of them. I figured once, but I don't remember what it was, maybe a couple $1,000 or something like that. It's cottage industry hobby income basically is what it amounted to. But, a great experience anyway, and I got a lot of good feedback from people. So
Nice. And you gave the software was free, so if someone wanted to build it themselves, they could do it.
yeah, I suggested a $10 shareware fee, and I would also give them the drawing, and the parts list and stuff. I think I was also at one point selling. It was a pain to build those things, and I would just sell the kit of parts. Okay, here's a little box, a prototype board, and here's how you do it. And some people wanted to do it themselves if they were electronic hobbyists, and others didn't. But yeah, I wanted to talk about trying to get the word out. So I did. One of the earliest ones, I guess I sent out some letters maybe to magazines that covered Atari and maybe also some users groups. It's hard to remember all these things, but you remember Computer Shopper? It was a big old thick, big format book. And
Certainly, yeah.
I have a letter somewhere. It's in late 1989. And there was a section or a column in there called Classic Computers because IBMs and clones and maybe some Apples were really dominating, but there were still a lot of people with their Commodores and Ataris and Sinclairs and whatever. And so they kind of covered that there. But anyway, I got the letter and it says, "Yeah, I'm going to describe your project in the February 1990 issue." And then his column went away before then. So, it has 180,000 circulation. Of course, almost all those are not interested in classic computers, but some of them were, But anyway, I got to mention an Antic, and then you gave me that link to the Classic Computing review, very positive review. And the Antic thing, I don't believe I was subscribed to that magazine. I may have been getting analog. But anyway, I started getting letters and checks, and people, I saw the write-up in Antic. Oh, really? Yeah, I want to buy one. So that's when I kind of kicked it off in early 1990 as far as selling the things. And that was kind of, you see me referring to notes because I've had to kind of try to refresh my memory. I've forgotten so much of this stuff.
This was a long time ago. It's fair.
Yeah. But, oh, yeah, another thing I was going to mention, so I'll back up a little bit on compatibility. I'll give you a whole bunch of gibberish about voltage levels, but there's also the issue of the connectors. On the PC, you have a standard DB9 or DB25, and you can buy those anywhere. But on the Atari, it's that kind of weird looking connector, and the big black thing. And I'm going, what is that? Where did I get it? And the technical reference notes, I don't think gave a part number or anything. But there was some company, I wish I could think of its name, it sold a whole lot of Atari stuff, a lot of Circuit stuff too.
It was probably Best Electronics or
I think it might have been Best.
Maybe
Yeah.
B&C Computer Visions, but I think they were mostly software.
Yeah. And they seem to have an inexhaustible, at least I hope it was an inexhaustible supply of replacement SIO cords. So I could buy that, cut it in half. Now I got two connectors, because my device little blue box. You push the cord in here, and the cord going to, and anyway, only needed one connector per system is the thing. So that was fortuitous that I was able to do that. Probably would have been a way to kind of come up with something, but it would have been a lot more cumbersome. But yeah, other than that, there was a lot into programming and adding features, and it seemed to be pretty well formed when I released it. People were happy with it, but I was getting a lot of correspondence about adding features and sometimes describing bugs, and I would have to try to kill those bugs, and I'd be adding features, and I'd dream up features myself. So I spent a whole lot of programming time. It was really a lot of fun because you kind of create your own universe with your own rules, and you just sit there and play in it. I'm not one of these computer guys that stays up until 3 a.m. or something, but I could put in an hour or two in the evening. It was very satisfying to do that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the features. I had a revision list somewhere, but I can't find it. But I had something about how to use it, and of course, just the ability to swap 2 disks is pretty simple and pretty easy to implement, but it's very useful. You could boot up on one, you could create another one, you could swap disk 1 and 2, and then you could reboot off the one you just created, that sort of thing. And then I was doing a lot of stuff as far as the different file formats, upload a file from the Atari to the PC, not into a disk image, but as a native PC file. And then, going the other way, taking a file on the PC and installing it as a disk, but not having to turn it into an ATR file. I think you wanted me to comment on the ATR thing, and I'll do that too. The print through option, to be able to print from your Atari, and then the PC intercepts it and sends it to the PC's printer.
The Atari doesn't know. You just send a P colon like you normally would, but the
Yeah,
PC's like, oh, that's for me, and sends it off to
right.
your printer.
And then you had the options to change the Atari tab and the Atari end of line codes to the standard. So, it'll work right with a printer that's a non-Atari printer. I had a remote control. Sometimes you wonder why you even did some of this, but it's like if your PC were in a separate room or something, you're sitting here at your Atari, and all of a sudden you realize you want to install another disk or something. Well, you could load this Atari program called Remote, and now you're typing on your Atari keyboard, but it's controlling SIO2PC in the other room or whatever. So there was that thing. Also, the ability to jump to high speed. I never did pursue the super high speeds, but I think Sparta DOS and maybe my DOS went to double speed, from 19.2 to 38.4 or whatever. And so that was good to be able to do that. Then I did this separate device, 1052PC, that was actually different hardware because it's kind of working the other direction. Instead of plugging your Atari into your PC, you plugged an Atari drive into your PC. Which seems a little weird, but you could do stuff. You could issue the drive standard commands, and then you could read what come back. And one useful thing would be to figure out what kind of copy protection is going on, or in general, what's wrong with this disk if something is wrong with it. Because you could call up sectors, and then it would give you the codes that indicated, all right, it's a bad sector, it's a double sector, it's a missing sector, that kind of thing. So that was another thing I added.
So that was a separate product, basically.
It was a separate product, and some people could see the value in it, but for most people, it wouldn't be a thing that they'd want. But
You hadn't mentioned. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I kind of did it for myself, but then I thought, well, maybe some people would want this, so I made a product out of it.
You hadn't mentioned. I don't think you mentioned RAM disks. You could turn the PC into a virtual drive for the Atari.
Right, and initially I felt like that was the way to go, was to, even if I had these ATR images on the hard drive I wanted to put them in RAM. And so that's what I did. I felt like that would be faster and cleaner. Although usually a hard drive is pretty fast, so I'm not sure what exactly I was thinking, but I did. I put them in the RAM space of the PC, and then interacted with it that way. Oh yeah,
Just one. Sorry, go ahead.
ATR thing. I started this thing, and I'm trying to keep an open mind and not paint myself into a corner or anything. So I thought, well, I'm going to create this disk image. But maybe I ought to have some kind of a recognizable code so that my program, SIO2PC, can look at that file and say, yep, this is intended to be an Atari disk image. So that was the only thing. It's just to put that code at the front, and then after that, it's just sectors, not 125 byte data sectors, but 128 sectors, which include all the information to point to the next sector and so forth. But anyway, I did that, and later I came to see that I probably really didn't need to, but it kind of added a term to the Atari world, ATR format. And of course, other people doing similar systems, they go, okay, well, we can read an ATR format, or we can read a plain PC file. And I could too after a while, after I realized it wasn't really a great advantage in having that. But now I had my own file extension to tell me, hey, this is
But I don't know. It's still in use. People still it's like still a standard. And they've
Yeah.
come up with like the ATX, which is a little better for, copy protected disks and things. But
Uh,
man, there's still just billions of ATR files out there.
yeah.
And so I think you undersell it when you say, oh, it wasn't really necessary.
Yeah. I don't know. Like you say, I did realize that, hey, this became something that people recognize. And I guess from that standpoint, maybe it had some value.
So did you put any much thought into uh, will this work with double density disks, or will it work with odd, different numbers of sectors or anything, or did you just
Yeah. Well, I think double density was something I felt like wouldn't be hard to implement right off the bat. So I did that. Although I don't think a lot of systems were using double density. I could be wrong there. Some of the more advanced ones, like I never used Sparta DOS much. I used my DOS mostly, and then Atari DOSes. But some of the more advanced DOSes may have been using. And then, eventually, may have even had a term like big disk or something where it could get as big as you wanted it to be. Uh, you could put all your Atari stuff on one disk image if you wanted to. I guess there are advantages and disadvantages to that, but within the limitations of whatever the pointer was, if it was 16 bits or whatever for the next sector number. So yeah, I did go to that. Uh, One of the things when I think back on this is about how I communicated with people in the Atari community who wanted to use this thing, because it seemed very odd to me at first, because like I say, I got a PC computer from DAC in 1989. I'm fairly certain in 1989 I got a 2400 baud modem, and I had email. But I noticed in none of my correspondence did I put an email address there. And all the here's my here's my correspondence file. It was all U.S. Post Office, or as they say, snail mail, and nothing was done by email. And when I reflected on it, I thought, well, okay, for one thing, maybe a lot of people didn't have email. And then some people had email, but to connect their modem to the provider, it might have been a long distance call. And then also, if we had hooked up that way, how were they going to pay me? There wasn't any Venmo or here's my credit card information.
Mhm.
They had to send me a personal check.
Mhm.
Of course, I had to send them a physical device. But excuse me, could I update them when I did a revision to the software? Not really. If that sucker was 40K, that would have been a huge attachment to try to attach to an email, and it had been rejected, just out of hand. So none of that was possible. And eventually probably got there, but I was long past the point of of developing or building things. I used to get, seemed like once a year or something, I'd get an email from somebody. Hey, I dug out my old Atari, and how does this work? I can't remember. And that's always fun. I have to try to refresh my own mind about how it worked. But
What
it's
year? What
interesting.
year did you come out with the device? I've just found a mention of it from 1991.
Yeah, I think there was an antic mention in 1990, according to my notes.
Hmm.
And then I said I had that letter from Computer Shopper in 1989. So I must have put this thing together in the year 1989. I said we bought that computer in 1989. It was January. So I probably spent 8 or 10 months developing the thing. And then by late 1989, it was kind of ready to go. And then starting to get announcements out to the world in 90. And I was flipping through this correspondence, and I had some people sending me letters in spring of 1990 saying, here's my check, please send me this and that. Another thing about the correspondence is, nobody writes letters anymore, and that's good or bad. Well, we all write a lot of emails, so it's the same deal, I guess. But it was quite enjoyable to get into some pen pal type of correspondence with people that would get off the subject maybe and tell them some personal anecdotes and stuff. Develop some friendships, through the mails that way, which is interesting when you're talking about computer
That's great.
communication. You're going back to an archaic communication method like letter writing.
I'm so
But
I'm so intrigued by that folder of correspondence that you showed me. First of all, that you saved it all these years.
yeah,
Should you just give me a sample of what's in there? Just
yeah,
grab one or two and just kind of show me. I want to know what you got.
let's see. March 1991. Boy, he wrote it took a whole page, Well, this dot matrix stuff really fades, but he says, I read with interest and excitement Bob Woolley's review of your SIO2PC device, software and hardware in the January issue of Atari Interface magazine. I am stationed in Germany. That was another thing that kind of excited me, an old country boy from Arkansas. I'm getting all these letters from Poland, the UK, Israel, Australia, and stuff. But anyway, yeah, he goes on. He's talking about using VisiCalc and so forth. And enclosed is a check for $50. That's the important thing. Here's another one. Oh, this is for me. I was wondering, how did I update people? Surely I didn't write everybody every time I did a new version. But dear SIO2PC user, I believe you're a user of 2.6 or 2.7. I recently discovered a bug, so I would by mail send out bug reports to people and then tell them, that they could get a revised copy. But I would have to send out a disc, so maybe I'd say send me a self-addressed stamped envelope or something. This is actually the guy writing on my letter. Yes, please send me the fix. Enclosed $2. Okay. Handwritten letter. It's so interesting. Like, one guy was trying to, I'm getting out of the picture, am I not? But he was an author, and he was trying to transfer stuff to Atari. No, he wanted to transfer his Atari disk. He'd been writing on the Atari to the PC. Turns out he had gone to the same little high school I went to in Arkansas, and he'd become a famous writer. He co-authored a book called Failsafe, and we had quite an interesting conversation. He knew my mother's brothers. This is way back. Here's one from Australia, 1990. Thank you for your reply to my letter. Enclosed is US $57 for the cost of the kit with the 25-pin RS-232 and shipping to me. So it's amazing. People wanted those big old connectors, but in some cases that's what the hardware has. Look what this guy put in his heading. I don't know if you can see that.
SIO2PC is great. The best solution for nice. Yeah,
Oh,
they,
yeah,
they
yeah.
use the print shop for that, clearly. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I wonder if that was a club. Maybe it might have been. But yeah, I let stuff get away, but I started sticking all this in a file. This guy says Genie messaging area. Never got into the BBS stuff. My sons did, but I didn't very much. So I guess that's how a lot of people communicated. But anyway, yeah.
It's so sweet that you saved that. I love that. Um,
I got a couple other show and tells.
yeah,
Talked about the keyer. This is the source code.
the source code for the keyer. That's a good
it's an
half-inch
inch
stick.
thick. I mean,
Yeah.
it's huge. So yeah, that was a big. And when I was talking about the things that allowed me to get into this project, I also wanted to mention the availability of documentation. Atari was very well documented with their reference notes. This is the hardware manual.
Mm-hmm.
There's connectors and stuff. And then they even had, I'm sure you know this, all the source code for the operating system.
The technical reference notes. Yeah.
Right. And it's great. And then they also published this thing, Day Ray Atari. Are you familiar with it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a great book because
that was the Bible.
instead of rather than being just dry technical stuff, it's written in I don't know, a more appealing style. And you talk about stuff like human engineering. And I say, now this is human fast. This is machine fast, telling you stuff like that you kind of need to know. While I'm doing the show and tell, very useful.
Mapping the Atari by Ian
Chadwick.
Yes.
And I also got a lot of use out of this book because it had a disk utility that explained a lot about sectors and so forth.
The analog compendium, sure.
I don't have that. I don't have it here, but there was a wealth of stuff for the IBM PC end. You had hardware books. You had books on the BIOS. You had books on the on DOS, and also I like to use data sheets a lot. You know, there's the 8250 timer chip, and they can get pretty dense. You know, they can get pretty technical, but after you go through it a half a dozen times, you can kind of figure out this and that. I like to program directly to the hardware. That's kind of fun. It can be stupid because the hardware changes, then the computer manufacturers will just update their BIOS. And if you're doing BIOS calls or even at a higher level DOS calls, it will be taken care of. But you're left on an island if you were talking to the hardware. You have to fix it yourself. But you know, that went with my idea of being the assembly language guy, you know, and getting right down to the nuts and bolts, and that's, you know, what I was trying to do. And I don't know, probably trod ground several times already. So I wanted to talk about the winding down part, which is, you know, I don't know over what period, but of course, everybody's going to bigger and more powerful computers and maybe putting their Ataris on the shelf, but also the IBM PC, as we called it then, or clones, were becoming Windows machines. Windows was getting more hostile, not intentionally, but incompatible with user authored stuff running under DOS because it would interfere with the timing. You're running your SIO2PC in a DOS window, and Windows is looking at it and going, there's been no activity from the keyboard lately. I think I'll switch to this other. And it would mess up the timings of the serial bus. And so eventually you just couldn't run that type of program anymore at all. So, and I wasn't ready to make a move to programming native in Windows. I wasn't ready to learn C. I've since kind of learned some C, and I did a real big program in C#, but that was years after the Atari stuff. So as far as what I wanted to remember, that's most of it. And I don't know if I covered a lot or most of the things you were interested in or not.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I just want to drop back. I mean, I feel like the SIO2PC was a revolution because the environment that we were coming from was if you wanted to get information off of your Atari, you were either using a cassette or a disc or a modem or a null modem.
Mhm.
Or and some people would sure you could fashion a cable with a joystick port, to bit bang the joystick port and send information to another Atari or something. Um, and that was it. And it was kind of every computer was kind of locked in. And then PC came out and you came up with this thing where let's make the PC a peripheral for the Atari. That was, I believe, amazing out of the box thinking that you created something that just hadn't been done before. Did you realize that at the time?
I kind of thought that it could be revolutionary because I hadn't seen anything like it. You never know if somebody else might be doing something at the same time you are, but I thought, yeah. And then in the reception I got to it, people, people who were knowledgeable Atari users looked at that and said, "Yeah, I want to do this. This really sounds great." So yeah, I feel like it was, uh, hit and goal there as far as coming up. And when you're a programmer, coming up with a worthy project is a lot of times is your biggest issue. You go, man, I'd like to be programming, but I don't know what to do. I don't want to work on something that's been done a million times, or maybe I do. But anyway, you have to have something to work on. I wanted. I was also going to mention, when I said winding down, people are getting away from Ataris and so forth, and I was getting away from Ataris, but other things were going on too. People were developing other means of high-speed mass storage, like the IDE drives. I never did get one, but there were these interfaces, and so people could hook maybe a little disk drive or something directly to the Atari. That was pretty cool. And then another thing was these emulators. One of them appeared when I was still actively doing SIO2PC stuff. I'm trying to think of the name of it now, but the guy's name was Derek Machoka or something like that. I forget, but
The
one
the
came
the one
out.
I, the one I used around that era was on the Mac. It was called Rainbow.
Okay.
But if there was a PC one, I don't know. Maybe it
Oh
was
yeah.
Altera at that point. I don't know.
Yeah. And when I started, about the time I talked to you earlier, uh, I'd gotten to investigating Atari things and finding out that there's so much stuff out there, and there were several emulators. I think one of them was just called Atari 800 or something, but
Hmm.
they're amazing. Their fidelity. When I first saw that, yeah, people could do this. Of course, there's a lot of power in a Windows computer, but they could do this so faithfully to the Atari. It's amazing. The the hard part is like joysticks and stuff. That's where if you're having to tap on your keyboard and things like that, that makes it a little difficult. But otherwise, they're quite amazing, and it means you don't have to dig out your old dusty hardware out of the basement or whatever. Maybe it's not even working anymore. You can still do stuff. I could run the AMAC, and I think I've done it. I got to the point once where I was doing all my assembly stuff. I didn't even have it. Well, I had an Atari, but I was doing it all on the Windows computer within an emulator. So it was, zip fast. I would have to retrain myself on exactly how that worked to do it
Right.
today.
Yeah,
But yeah,
cross assembly is amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, and fast and neat.
yeah. Another thing, as far as retraining myself, I wanted to look at some of these old programs I'd written in case they came up, and some of them I couldn't really find the source code. And then I'm thinking, some of it's locked up in these ATRs, but at this moment, I'm not equipped to, it'd take me an hour or two to either use an emulator or get out my hardware and say, okay, let's extract these text files, which is what source code is, from these ATRs, download them to a PC file so I can refer to them in the future. I may still do that, I'm getting a
Right.
little
Or
energized
send them to me. I can do it in 30 seconds.
now.
I
Yeah, I thought, well, I
happy
could
to
run
do
a
it.
utility. And then I thought, there's probably utilities out there, tons of them that can do
Yeah. Yeah,
this.
there's command line Linux utilities. There's all sorts of
Oh, wow. Well, maybe
yeah,
I'll do that. Yeah.
yeah. But if you don't want to take the time to learn how to do it, or that
Mm-hmm.
could be fun too. So did
Yeah.
you did you get back into Atari a little bit after we talked a couple of years ago?
I did to a certain amount. I was using my keyer program, playing games, and I bought a little hardware device that would allow the composite convert the. It was either composite or RGB. It was probably RGB because Atari gives you both to VGA, and I hooked to a VGA monitor, and it even had the sound, I think. So it was working pretty well. But I've already got so much junk here, and I was kind of thinking of really getting back into writing some more 6502 code and or maybe enhancing some of the programs I've done. But I finally backed away from that. I like to try to keep the past alive and not let all this stuff die out. But you can't totally do that and still keep going forward with your life because there's so much complexity in there. So that was a long answer to a short question, but yeah, I may dig it out and play with it some more.
I'll just keep interviewing you until you're doing Atari full time.
Yeah. The Atari
um,
was such a great computer, and when I got the PC, comparatively, I go, man, this PC is pretty lame. It's got like two timers, and due to an error in the BIOS, one of them doesn't work, and it can't do this 4-channel sound and all this other stuff, But eventually they came around and, started putting all that stuff in PCs. They had to call it presentation, sound, and graphics, so it was suitable for a business environment.
right.
Otherwise it was frivolous. Look at this. They're playing games. They're playing music.
Did you ever collaborate or work with or deal with Stephen Tucker? He had a similar product called Ape that was sort of like SIO2PC.
Right. No, I never did. I don't know if we communicated. We may have once or twice, but I was very aware of his stuff and what he was doing. I thought he was putting a lot of work into it. For instance, doing the 850 interface emulation, which I never did that. And I looked at his program some. I think it's quite a bit similar to mine. So yeah, I don't know if there were others or not. Nowadays there probably are, but back then I think that was it.
I don't think any other major SIO2PC devices happened. It was yours, there was Atari Max, and that was good enough. Those were two choices. And then of course now there's SIO to USB and FujiNet and other things, and
Oh yeah,
that um, the PC is not really a needed component anymore.
yeah.
Yeah,
And when you were talking about being kind of a revolutionary thing, and another thing was that SIO2PC kind of became a generic term. It's just like an interface, a connection between Atari and the PC, I think. And I noticed later people were cloning the hardware, and using my software, which once again is fine. That's not a complaint, but it was just, I guess it's a, what do you call it, sincere form of flattery, maybe.
right, right. Um, I believe you also did something called AtariCOM, which, according to this, I've never used it, said could connect multiple Atari 8-bit computers together and communicate between them using SIO and joystick ports. Does that ring a bell?
It rings a bell, but I don't know. I may have overstated it if I said multiple. At least, especially with joystick ports, I think it was 1-to-1. Well, I think I only had two Ataris at the time, but this was me learning to do communication. I did one called Talk PIA or something like that. The PIA is the chip that goes to the joystick, and I interface. And this is a non-clock logic, so I kind of had to invent it myself. You have a 2 or 3 lines, and it gets very interesting how you have to do it to keep the two computers from getting confused about who's got the ball at this time and stuff. But it worked really well. It's very fast because it wasn't clocked, so it'll run as fast as it will run. But I think I remember having a computer out in the garage with my ham radio and another one in the house, and I was talking between them. But then I thought, well, if I only had one disk drive, how did I load that one? I think I may have put some kind of boot thing on a cassette. That's just about primitive enough to be something I would have done. And then I also wondered, why did I go to the SIO from the joystick? And the answer to that should be that a computer will boot off the SIO find something that looked like a boot sector of a disk drive. So I probably wrote on one a fake boot sector, and then the other one without a disk drive would boot from that, and then they could start talking to each other. So I think that's probably why I went the SIO way. Plus, I just wanted to learn about it. That was my initial education on it. That was preceded, SIO2PC by a couple of years, I guess. So learning about data communication.
Nice. Did you work on any other Atari projects that you recall that we haven't talked about yet?
It was mostly minor stuff, with ham radio. I did a kind of a terminal program to connect to something called a packet radio interface. Basically, it needed the dumb terminal, and so I was creating a dumb terminal.
We have that program and the source code are already up on Internet Archive, thanks to you last time.
I also built a radio frequency synthesizer that could be controlled by the serial line. So naturally, I wrote a program for the Atari to control that synthesizer, basically to set it to whatever frequency you wanted or scan frequencies or whatever. I did it on the Atari, and then I did it again on the PC in assembly language. So that was, from a ham radio point of view, that's one of the things you're going to do, a frequency controlled device or frequency generating device that can be controlled through some kind of a data link. Naturally, you're going to write a program to do that because it's there. But other than that, I never did write any games or anything because, like I say, I wasn't. I like games, but I wasn't. I'm not very visually oriented, so designing that kind of thing, it's not my strong suit.
All right. I probably asked you this last time, but what haven't I asked you about that time that I should have?
I'm glad the Atari world is still out there. I really appreciate what you're doing, and I look on the web and see people are still doing stuff, so that's heartening. It's easy to think if you get away from something, then the whole world's gotten away from it, and then you come back and you go, oh no, it's still alive and kicking, so that's good.
Thank you for your time, Nick. This was great.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. Enjoyed the reminiscence. Now I've got a little document I wrote up. I didn't have time to review it that much. Maybe I'll even send it to you.
Great. Yeah. Love to see it. And yeah, thank you for creating SIO2PC. I used it extensively. I don't remember how I got my cable, but I used it in the mid 90s extensively. Someone sent me hundreds of discs from the old Hackers Atari users group newsletter, and one by one, I just methodically copied those discs using SIO2PC from the Atari to a PC, and then I think somehow I FTP'd those to some website or something, and now they're available still now, but there's so many better and faster ways to do it now, but there wasn't then, and your thing was how I got it done, and those things are saved because of you.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Nick.
Goodbye, Atari people.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, please consider supporting my Patreon at patreon.com/Savitz. I've been publishing interviews like these since 2013 and would like to continue doing so for a long time, and your financial support will help. Thanks.